So there has been a copious and rather mind-numbing amount of people discussing the Elden Ring DLC, and a lot of the discussion is very fair and has legitimate criticism, and half of it is just people complaining about artificial problems because they don't like that the game doesn't hold their hand. I think this is caused mainly because people over the past 2 years got so used to be able to just go through New Game Plus 7 and, steamroll Malekith with their max level character and their Rivers of Blood and just boom, mow down bosses. And then the DLC comes out, and then this guy in someone's basement does like oh my god. And when people say the DLC is harder, yes, it has to be. It inherently has to be harder because in order to make a DLC good for a game like Elden Ring especially, there has to be that same difficulty that the original player experienced when they're first playing Elden Ring. And it shows that a lot of people don't play old Souls games, or a lot of Elden Ring audience didn't at least, because compare Bloodborne to like Bloodborne's DLC in difficulty, it is night and day. I feel like the majority of Bloodborne's base game has pretty easy bosses, honestly, for a Souls game, because there's a lot of builds you can make that are just like goofy. Like you can just mash Saw Spear on a boss and it'll just die like pretty quick. And then in the DLC, it's like, oh my god, your opening boss is Ludwig. Okay, that's fun. And then you finally get to the end, and it's Orphan. And compare like Orphan to like Gehrman. It is night and day, the difficulty. And the same thing happens in Elden Ring. And it's because the DLC has to be hard. The DLC comes out given that you've done everything possible, and so they have to make it harder. But I feel like a lot of people weren't expecting that because they were thinking that their build would sort of trump that potential challenge there. And I think a lot of the same discussion happened with the base game, because a lot of people I know personally, like, oh, Elden Ring it's hard, I've heard, but I'll get through it. And they get to Margit, and it's like, oh, okay. They get there with their default armor, their weapon, they start poking him, and his health goes from like 100% to 99. And they're like, oh, okay. And they lose, done, like 2 hits, they're dead. And they're like, oh my god, I'm just gonna stop playing this game. And then people go into the DLC think, oh, I've overcome Margit, I've done this, I've done that, this will be easy. And then they go into these crazy bosses. Like, let's say, okay, Rolana, she sucks, she's annoying, she's very evil. But if you're going into Rolana, the developers know, okay, you've beaten. Let's see what you have to do to get to Rolana. You've beaten Margit, you've beaten Godric, you've beaten Moog, you've beaten Radahn, you've beaten Renali. I mean, given you've beaten Moog, you've probably done some other stuff. So let's say you've beaten Morgott and the Fire Giant at least, right? So you've done so many of the bosses. So you probably should have a good grip of the game. And so therefore, when you get to the DLC, they're not going to let you just walk through it. They know you're pretty solid at the game. But the boss just steamrolling, and people go, oh my god, it's too hard. That was very... What there is there's a leveling system in the DLC. Wow! With the Shadow Tree. It's pronounced Shadow Tree, I don't know why. It's spelled Scadu, I don't know, it's weird. But if you get those fragments, you'll notice that you very quickly take less damage and deal tremendously more damage as you play the game. And what's good about the Shadow Tree fragments is that it prevents you from steamrolling through the entire DLC, and instead forces you to go, oh, what's in this area? Oh, there's these two guys in a lion zoo, which is a fantastic boss. It's hysterical. And then there's this other area where it's like, oh, why is there this weird goopy horseman? That's strange. And it forces you to experience Elden Ring again. I should really stop waving this around. And it's just people were hoping, I think there's a lot of people who were expecting just steamroll through the game, because most previous FromSoft DLCs, I think all of them actually, I'm not sure, but all of them, I think, you could just go in at any time, or like the Bloodborne DLC, for example, the Old Hunters, you can go in pretty early into the game, realistically. Like, you don't have to do all the stuff you have to do in Elden Ring to get to the Old Hunters. You just gotta beat, god, what do you have to do? You might have to beat Rom. I don't remember. Here's what you have to do. I don't remember for sure. I'm gonna be honest with you. We're in Elden Ring. You gotta start up the game. You gotta start up the game. That is. And people think the DLC was gonna be easy. No. In order to access it, you have to beat one of the hardest optional bosses in the game.
What do you mean it was gonna be easy? What do you mean? What do you mean?
I'll be honest. I did have to use some of the DLC weapons and stuff in order to beat this guy. This guy is such a good boss, but oh my god, I went in with a strength build. I tried about 17 times before I got to phase 2, and oh my god, when that phase shift happened, I just why? And then I was like, okay, this is not gonna work. I gotta change something up here. And so I went and got the Great Katana and the Savage Lion's Claw, I think is what it's called. With the DLC, people don't realize that it has to be more difficult in order for that progression to stay in the base game. That's why Rolana and like the Dancing Lion are such hard bosses initially, because people they're used to they killed Melania probably. Most people who probably played the DLC killed Melania, I'm betting. And so they go into it and they're like, oh, I beat Melania, I can beat any boss from somewhere. And then they walk into Rolana and they get hit twice and their health is at like a fourth. And they're like, oh my god, what is it? This is too difficult. Oh my god, I don't understand. This is FromSoftware's off their rocker. But in reality, they just gotta go explore, do the same thing they did in the base game, instead of getting Estus Flask, like, oh my god, the seeds or whatever, and the other things, I forget what they're called. If you, instead of getting that, you get the Shadow Tree fragments. And if you do that, the bosses will get easier. The game gets easier. And if you really have to, the game gives you resources to beat these bosses. Majority of the Remembrance bosses have one summon in front of them, and you can use your own, like, Spirit Ash. So if you're really struggling on, I don't know, Mesmer, you can summon the weird guy with the mask, and he cries, he's weird, I don't know. And then you can summon Mimic Tier with that, and it's like, okay, it's a 3v1, you can probably beat this, given that you've reached Mesmer. If you really have to use all those resources. If you do, that's fine, realistically. I didn't want to, because I am a psychopath who spent 94 attempts on the final boss without a cheese build or Spirit Ashes, because I wanted to get the Souls experience. But other than that, I really think that if you just buckle down instead of just going, the game's too hard, if you instead just think and go, okay, I have this Spirit Ash, I have this summon on the floor. If I coordinate these two things and I simply go into the fight and use when they attack to get more windows, you can beat majority of the game. And if you really have to, you can just respec. And this is gonna be spoilers, because I'm gonna talk about spoilers here. The final boss, blah blah blah. If you just cannot beat Radahn, if you can't, if you can't beat Radahn, that's completely understandable, because I'm gonna talk about this more later. The visibility is just terrible. It is awful, and it is just a hard fight, even if visibility wasn't there. If you gotta use the Great Shield and the Poison or Scarlet Rot Spear or whatever, if you enjoy the game, just do that. You don't have to be a crazy person like me that does 94 attempts on one boss in one video game's DLC. You don't have to do that. Just use the resources and enjoy the game. If you enjoy the game by bashing your head against the wall, do what I did. If you want to just get through it, use the ashes, use the summons, use the spell, make a dumb one-shot spell build. Do whatever you gotta do. Just get through the game that way. Even though I didn't use any summons or anything to beat the final boss, there were some bosses that I felt were like enhanced by certain summons. And if you know the new best NPC of all of Souls games, it is pretty obvious why I'm saying this. There's a boss that is pretty close to, I'm just gonna say what it is. Okay, it's a Bale is so good, and it's already like a phenomenal fight. But when you get Egon, it is so good, because the dude just will not shut up.
Curse you, Bale! I hereby vow you will rue this day. Behold, a true Drake warrior, and I, Egon, your fears made flesh. Solid of scale you might be, foul dragon, but I will riddle with holes your rotten hide. With a hail of harpoons! With every last drop of my being!
It is cinema. It is perfection. It makes the fight so much better. And there's summons that enhance the game narratively, if that's your thing. And personally, I am a nerd, and so I wanted that to happen. I would use summons if it made the fight good. On the final boss, when there is a summon, and if you use said summon, it will explain some lore pieces about the boss, which is very cool. It'll explain what led the player and the actions in the DLC to get to where we are now, which is very cool. So, you can use the summons. The game kind of wants you to, when you consider, the devs were like, how can we tell the player the lore of the DLC that we've been working on for who knows how long? Oh, let's use one of our main mechanics we made in the base game and make that a way, because we're gonna make the bosses very difficult. The summons that the player uses in order to help them beat the bosses. Wow, let's have them explain what's happening, and let's have Egon talk about a hail of harpoon. But the two big things that are legitimately wrong with the DLC that I do agree with personally is that there are some performance issues. Like some of the bosses, they are so flashy that my PC would like fully freeze up for like a second, and that would cause me to like take a hit or something. And that the camera is really bad. The camera is it's kind of scary. Like on Dancing Lion, there are some points where it does like the weird spin attack, where it does like the two rhythms. Also, I love that just two guys in there. That's amazing. It's so silly. But when it's the two little spins it does. When that runs you into a wall, your camera just goes. It just loses it, and it's like, okay, what is happening? You try to lock on, it does that again. You try not to lock on. It's like, okay, gotta manually twist to the guy. And then once I'm looking at the guy, he hits you again. Then your camera goes all wacko all. And with the performance issues of the game, yeah, there's some problems with it. Besides just the bosses. I don't know why. I don't know if anyone else experienced this, because I was cursed and I had some performance issues. Sometimes in the map, there would be like trees or like a wall of a big dungeon, and it would just like blip out and blip back in really quick. I don't know if anyone else had that. Maybe my graphics card just sucks. I don't know. The lore is fine. It does address. Here's where the spoilers start. But until then, there's a lot of stuff in the base game that is not addressed at all. There's several plot points. They're not plot points. They're like lore pieces that the game says, oh, this one group of people exists. Oh, this one guy exists. Oh, this thing. And the DLC, there's just no mention of them at all. You get to the DLC, it's like, oh, okay, do you want to see Godwin? No. We're instead gonna take Radon and make you fight him again. And granted, it is very cool getting to see like Prime Radon before the Scarlet Rot or whatever. That's very cool. But also, there is so much teasing of Godwin and the death and all the stuff in the base game. And it's like, oh, I wonder if this very obvious thing that is not fully answered will be answered in the DLC, and it wasn't. That was cool. It does answer things that are not super necessary. Like there's one piece of lore regarding Placidus Axe, and if you don't want to know it, skip, we'll say 20 seconds. It says why Placidus Axe lost his two heads, and it is because they're on Bale's back after they fought. That is so cool. Oh my god. But one thing I think personally that most people have not addressed is that there are whole like sections of the map that are huge, that have like remembrance bosses in them, that are just so cool with like the lore they introduce, and they are locked behind hidden walls and dungeons, and it's like, why? Don't do that. Like Elden Ring base game, sure, it had a lot of areas that were really hard to find, but there is so much in the DLC that is just hidden behind the most annoying stuff. Like there is this massive area that is hidden behind doing an emote that you get in one village that you have to do in front of one statue, and you couldn't piece it together. I'm not smart enough to do that. I'm kind of stupid, and so I had to look it up. And I don't like looking things up in Souls games, because I like to naturally explore and go, oh, what's this? Wow. People who think the game is too hard, they're just wrong. It is harsh but fair, because I think there's a legitimate argument about the final boss of the DLC and Melania, because they each kind of have some moves that are like, oh, you're doing that move, I'm dead now. Whereas, you know, things like Mesmer, they're completely fair. You could argue there's some jank with hitboxes sometimes, but the majority of it is completely fair. If you just memorize the attack patterns, if you just do all this, if you just like put in, no, I don't say put in the work, that sounds cheesy, but you know what I mean. If you just memorize the attacks, you'll get done in time eventually. Overall, it's phenomenal. I'm gonna gush about it because it's so good. This is a DLC. Compare this DLC to other games. This DLC is bigger than so many AAA games. It's $40. You can get Elden Ring plus the DLC for $80. That is bunkers. You're gonna get a lot of hours out of it for $80. You could be doing a lot of other things that'll give you a lot less, like, entertainment for the money. Whereas Elden Ring, like, I know the DLC took me, I don't know, 55 hours to beat. But I like to do every single thing in this Souls game because I'm crazy. But if you just gun it for the boss, you can probably do it quicker. But still, it is so good. Overall, it's fantastic. If you want to get it, get it. If you want to get Elden Ring, get it. Oh my god, it's so good. I made a video a long time because I've been very busy. And then I got not busy, and then Elden Ring came out. And so, okay, go away now.